far, but it's not just me this segment or the next segment. It's This Week in Politics, the Friday edition, and I'm joined by Chris Chapin, political commentator and managing principal at Upstream Strategies. Hello, my friend.
Howdy, Ben.
And introducing new to the panel, Ian Brodie from the University of Calgary, professor in the Department of Political Science, fellow at the Center for Military Security and Strategic Studies, senior advisor, New West Public Affairs. Ian, you're the type of guy that when you hand someone your business card, you have to fold it out 3 or 4 times.
It's a bit heavy. Good to see you, Ben.
Good to see you. Good to see you. Let's jump right in because the story that we started talking about earlier this week was the more conciliatory, more productive tone of the Conservative Party coming out of their convention, saying they're willing to work with the Liberals on shared principles, and where they can work together, they are. We saw that in practice with bail reform moving forward. The Conservatives made a deal that they supported. They supported this bill so long as the anti-hate bill got shelved for now, and sounds great. And I looked. If you read the article in the Globe and Mail, Ian, it's there's some head-shakingly questionable positions that the Liberals took on amendments that the Tories brought forth, and most notably the idea of the principle of restraint, which maybe you can tell people about, and it got voted down by the Liberals.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think we all know, if you live in a big city, that the bail reforms of the Trudeau government have been a bit of a mess, that there's a revolving door of people who should be in jail before they go to trial. It should be held before they're in trial to get these people are released, and then they're arrested again almost as soon as they're released. So there had to be some change.
Yeah.
Is this going to be as big a change as you'd get with a Conservative government? Of course not. But it's a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
And part of making a minority government work here is that Carney and the Carney government have put a bit of water in their wine, which is how this has to work.
Right.
So we had a bit of chest beating last week. The Liberals, we can't get anything through. The Conservatives come through their convention, and now we're finally getting back to the way politics is supposed to work.
Right.
They got behind closed doors and had a deal, which is just the way this is supposed to go.
Yeah, exactly. Like the Conservatives helped get this done, but you had Chris Chapin, you had Larry Brock of the Conservatives saying this is a Band-Aid solution. It's not. And I did see, by the way, I saw the argument that's being made by the Liberals after the Conservatives supported the grocery rebate, where they said, "Why are you criticizing it? You supported it." I don't know if that argument flies.
No, I think Ian made a great point. This is how a minority parliament is supposed to work. Yeah. To Larry Brock, is this what the Conservatives would have brought forward as bail reform? Absolutely not. But that's not the Conservative government in power right now. So I think, I thought this was an encouraging sign coming out of the convention. Yeah. And even more so, frankly, out of Prime Minister Harper's remarks over the last week, yeah, talking about a bit of unity and a bit of understanding. I mean, here's a man that led our country through multiple minority parliaments, knows a thing or two about striking the balance with the opposition, yeah, so he can stay in power, but move forward a conservative agenda. And I hope this is a sign of things to come. I think it's something Pierre Poilievre will benefit him in the long run by showing a bit of that conciliatory tone, understanding that, he didn't get the mandate from the Canadian people to introduce bail reform the way the Conservatives would like to. So if this is a first step out of that convention, out of his kind of, slightly changed tone in his remarks, and then I think, frankly, the leadership we saw out of Prime Minister Harper this past week celebrating his 20th anniversary of taking power, I think it's a good sign to come for the Conservative Party of Canada.
But Ian, I think one of the reasons this is a survival mechanism, a survival strategy for the Conservatives, because if the polls are to be believed, that if we were to go to the polls in, say, May, the Liberals, all things being equal, would probably win a majority right now. So this is about making sure that the narrative about Parliament not working falls flat, so that if anyone is not making it work, it's the people who want the election. And it feels to me that the Liberals were road testing that argument for a while, and now it feels like the Tories are doing the smart thing and demonstrating their willingness to work, thereby making maybe a spring election a little less likely.
Absolutely. I think Pierre Poilievre made a good decision here not to fall for the trap, not to give the Liberals an excuse to have an early election. If Carney wants to have an early election, well, that's on him. He's going to have to explain it. He's had a year. What really has changed other than this grocery rebate? But then the onus is on him to explain it. On the polls, I want to say, remember, 14 months ago, we were counting towards Pierre Poilievre massive majority government, 26 points ahead, blah, 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 blah. Whatever the poll was yesterday, there's a different one today. And as soon as you call that early election, there's an awful lot of governments, including Mr. Harper in 2008, called an early election expecting to sew up his majority. Voters sometimes have a different view.
Yeah.
So you can never really count on that.
Well, let's move on to some more business in Ottawa. The infrastructure minister, Gregor Roberts, confirmed that the feds were cutting $5 billion over 10 years for a key transfer program for municipal transit. So it's set up in 2024 called the Canada Public Transit Fund. It was promised to deliver $3 billion a year. And he's saying, no, it's going to be a lot less than that now. Does that mean that the end user is going to be paying more? Does that mean that property taxes are going to be going up across this country, Chris?
I think it's probably far too early to tell, Ben. Let's be honest, property taxes have gone up with or without these kind of funds from the federal government. I think, we've got city halls across this country that have run amok when it comes to fiscal restraint. And so I think it's frankly a very interesting sign from the federal government of restraint. These big infrastructure funds have become, the greatest thing any government can use because nobody actually knows where the money goes. Yeah. So for them to come forward and say, actually, we're going to draw this back, there's other things municipalities can access. I personally, maybe it's just selfish and naive, and it probably is. I hope this is a sign from the federal government. I'd like to see other provincial governments follow suit saying, municipalities, you need to stop counting on us to come to the table. You guys have budgets that you need to balance yourselves. Certainly, Ben, you and I see it here in Toronto. There's not a shortage of revenue for the city of Toronto, but man, can we find ways to spend the money and then go calling for more, right? Yeah. And so I think drawing back and cutting back some of these, extravagant funds isn't a bad thing if that's the end goal. I'm just, with this Liberal government, not confident that that's actually what they're trying to do.
Yeah, but I think you're probably right. I think if a municipal government has displayed fiscal restraint, then this won't be a big problem. And otherwise, cities like Toronto, for example, are probably going to look at this and say, well, you've taken money away from us. But Ian, your new mayor, who I had the pleasure of meeting last week in Calgary, he told me, he said, we've got the very few things that a city government should do, we want to do as well as we possibly can. And I said, where has this guy been my whole life? I suspect he would find a way to work around this announcement for public transit.
Yeah, look, here in Alberta, here in Calgary, he's got a good example. No sooner has become mayor, it turns out this water main that we had for 50 years that blew up 2 years ago, blew up again. And there seems to have been some cover-up of the engineering studies that said this was a bomb waiting to go off underneath the Trans-Canada Highway and take out half the city's water supply. So let's get back to making sure that the very basics are done well, that the water is going to flow, that the garbage is going to get cleaned up. And we could do some other things later.
Yeah, no, it's but I just have a feeling that if he heard news that there was less transit money coming from Ottawa, I think his perspective, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he feels like the type of politician who would say, you know what, that's fine, we're doing fine here.
Well, I do want to say on the transit stuff, keep in mind where this money's going to go. It's going to go to this crazy high-speed rail from Ottawa to Montreal. They're going to expropriate a bunch of farms and take the 2-hour commute between Ottawa and Calgary, Ottawa and Montreal down to an hour and 30 minutes or whatever it is. That's where this money's going.
Yeah. Well, listen, I could tell you that back in the day when my dad or my mom needed to get from Ottawa to Montreal or vice versa, the RCMP would put
absolutely,
and they would get there like 70 minutes flat. I'm not advocating for speeding on the highway unless you have a national emergency. All right.
Only if you've got the cops.
Yeah, only if you got the cops. All right, don't go anywhere because when we come back, we're going to put the question to our panel. So Jamil Jivani have gone down to Washington. Welcome back to the Ben Mulroney Show, and welcome back to my panel, Chris Chapin, and new to the panel, Ian Brodie. Thank you both for sticking around. I want to talk about Jamil Jivani making a trip down to Washington in the hopes of adding to the conversation and unsticking, it looks like it's stuck, unsticking the conversations that could eventually lead us to a better place with our American trading partners. And I've heard a lot of hay being made about this. I've heard people thinking it's a great idea and people not thinking it's a great idea. I find when I hear some of the criticism coming from Conservatives, I wonder if something else is at play. I wonder if when they have an issue with it, Chris, and I have no opinion in either direction. I think if it can help, if he comes home and some good has come, well, then it's good. And if he comes home and nothing's happened, well, then it was a waste of everybody's time. But sometimes I hear these criticisms from conservatives, and I wonder whether their issue is with the trip or with Jamil Javani.
I mean, I think it's probably both, Ben. I think Jamil's a bit of a lightning rod within the conservative movement. I think there's not a lot of middle ground with Jamil. I think, yeah, they're kind of like him or you hate him. I think it's interesting. I don't know what to make of the trip. I would say, as somebody who's worked in an opposition leader's office, in the past, if this individual was freelancing, typically you're not long for staying in caucus, and it certainly does not sound like, from any of the comments made publicly by the official opposition, that this was a sanctioned trip down for Jamil. He's not the trade critic, for example. It's not that he should frankly be down there in the first place. That is something the governing party gets to do because they have the power. The idea of Jamil going, in theory, sounds logical to me. Here is an individual, a Canadian, in very turbulent trade times that has a personal relationship with the Vice President of the United States. And it doesn't seem like we have very strong relationships at all with the inner circle around the President of the United States. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. I remember when your father was tasked back in 2016.
That's why I think I'm open to the idea. And for context, the Liberals threw in with Hillary Clinton to the point that when they were surprised that Donald Trump won the first time around, they had no entry points, none at all, into his administration. And so they called the only guy they knew who had some sort of relationship with him, which was my dad, and that led to him speaking to their caucus and sort of being a voice in the renegotiation of NAFTA, which, we'll remember, Donald Trump said was the greatest deal of all time until it wasn't. Mm-hmm. And so I appreciate taking advantage of the institutional knowledge and connections that exist beyond the control and command of the PMO. And it served us well once. And so that's why I'm like, it might be a good idea. Ian, what do you think?
Look, I'm not the Brian Mulroney expert on this panel, but if I remember anything about your father running 2 trade agreements into the United States, he used every tool at his disposal. And I got to think, in this case, if he was our prime minister today, he'd see a guy who's got a personal connection to the vice president say, hey, buddy, get down there and see what you can do.
Yeah. I
get that there's all sorts of political considerations here. Some people think he's up to this. Some people think he's up to that. Some people on Carney's benches who are worried he's, what's he going to say, and this, that, and the other thing. The national trade interest is at risk here. And insofar as we haven't been able to break this logjam with the Americans, this is worth a try. I think anybody who cared about our most important trade relationship and the thousands of people who are being laid off right now because it's gone off the rails is going to say, get down there and do what you can. And God bless them for going.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sort of at that place as well. I mean, this is either the most important thing, this is either the most consequential crisis of our lifetime, which we were told by the prime minister, or it's not. And if it is, then an all-hands-on-deck mentality should carry the day. And you're right, Ian, when you look at it that way, this is a guy who texts regularly with the Vice President of the United States. And there are communications that you can have in person that don't work over the phone. And now is not the time to be prideful or to be precious about these relationships. I voted conservative in the last election. If Mark Carney is responsible for getting us a deal, I will cheer him on, and I won't. It won't be partisan. I don't know why the partisanship has to come into it at this point, Chris.
I don't disagree with either view, and I think all three of us probably voted the same way in the last election. I'd say, if I was playing devil's advocate, Jamil Jivani is a very partisan member of Pierre Poilievre's caucus. Perhaps one of the most. I mean, he's a guy that's going around on a speaking tour trying to unite the youth into like a conservative movement a la Charlie Kirk. So I get the government side as well. If this was something, and I agree, like if we can tap into this guy and he could actually move the needle, then we should certainly do that.
Yep.
I think there's, unfortunately, both by the Carney government's lack of willingness to actually engage with somebody like Jamil Javani, and Jamil Javani's personal partisan beliefs, it just makes I think it makes the whole situation a mess.
Yeah.
And I think we could have done a better job, and we should have done a better job. And unfortunately, we haven't done either. And so we find ourselves debating multiple times a week on radio since he's gone down there about whether or not this trip was impactful or not. And I would say the only thing, there hasn't been any formal communication back from the United States. Hopefully that's a good thing. Hopefully this was a productive trip.
Yeah.
But trips like this typically end in some sort of a communique talking about the engagement, and that just hasn't happened. So frankly, we're left up to Jamil Javani's word about what took place in the tweet he put out publicly. And I personally just don't know where to land on that one.
Yeah, I guess where I'm going to land is whatever this trip yielded. And if it was useless and if it was just there for him to raise his profile, then, thanks for wasting our time. But if he comes back and has contributed to this and has helped Team Canada, I was told it was Team Canada, not Team Carney. And if he helped Team Canada, then I'm gonna celebrate the accomplishment and I'm gonna celebrate the contribution. Let's move on to Danielle Smith, because a couple of days ago she suggested that she's not liking how the judges are writing law. They're writing law. They're not interpreting law, and the way they're interpreting it is Looney Tunes. And I think with each passing day, we get an example of a judge not living in the reality of everyone else. Just yesterday in Alberta, there was a story of a former football player who was given a very lenient sentence for a crime that is so awful, a sexual crime on a woman that's so awful that I can't even bring myself to talk about the details. But that's okay, woman who was sexually assaulted by him, because he was Indigenous, and so your rape means less. And so this is the kind of craziness that she's asking for a little bit of say in. And she was told thanks but no thanks by Sean Fraser, the Justice Minister. Ian, with each passing day and with each passing crazy judgment, does the government's position become less? Are they holding less strong cards?
Look, we had 10 years of appointments of people, some of whom shouldn't be on the bench because they were worried about some political program rather than the rule of law. And you see this even in Ontario, in Ottawa there, this bike lane is a charter of rights right. You can't make some other change to the flow of traffic. I think Danielle Smith's got two issues here. There's a Western Canada vacancy coming up in the Supreme Court, and she made the case that if you're looking for somebody who's bilingual, that takes some people off the list that maybe should be on that. I'm open to that conversation. And then we've got a bunch of judges here, federally appointed in Alberta, who are making these kinds of sentencing decisions and so forth that just don't have a lot of public support. I think there's a reckoning coming for the judiciary here.
Yeah.
I think there's going to be a longer term problem here. And if the Supreme Court rules later on this year that the provincial government can't use the notwithstanding clause to undo some of these decisions, you're going to see more of these demands to have input into judicial appointments and have judges removed from the bench.
Yeah. Chris Chapin, the last 30 seconds to you.
No, I couldn't have put it better than Ian. I think we've seen this, like the judgment he referenced in Ontario, that a judge thought that they could dictate whether or not we remove bike lanes and that it was a constitutional right to have a bike lane. People are getting sick and tired of this. I welcome Danielle Smith to it. I mean, the Premier Ford here spoken openly about the idea of maybe having elected judges. It's about time we smarten up the judiciary of this country.
Ian Brodie, Chris Chapin, thanks so much. Have a great weekend.
Yeah, you too, Ben.
Thanks so much for watching the show. Now, if you enjoyed what you saw, hit that subscribe button so you never miss another episode of The Ben Mulroney Show.